Hey, let's do a giant 2-month wrap up. Hi, I'm Colleen. If you're new here, I talk about books and writing. Today, we're going to wrap up all the books I read in February and March. But here's a little secret. I actually did film a February wrap up at the beginning of March and then just never edited it and never posted it and never made a thumbnail. And I'm not going to re-talk about all those books because honestly, some of them I read almost 2 months ago. And so I don't remember them that well. So we're going to use that footage that I filmed and I'm going to splice it in. And I'll put a little marker so you know when February is and when March is. So for now, please enjoy your February wrap up. So this is just a regular February wrap up. I read 5 books, ? In February. I technically read 6, but I'm actually not going to review the 6th book that I read because I read it mostly when I couldn't fall asleep at night on my Kindle in spurts of like 5 pages, and I don't really remember it at all, and I don't feel like I could give it a fair review. So while I'm counting it towards my books read of the year, because I technically did finish it, I don't feel like I could actually review it for you other than to say it was a 3-star read, because I can't really remember anything about it. I don't remember disliking it. I don't remember liking it. Just remember it helping me go to sleep. It was Mountain Heat by Ren Booth, and it's a short novella, and I'm sure it's lovely, and it really did help me fall asleep, so it's definitely not stress-inducing. So it's got that going for it no matter what. Now let's talk about the books that I read conscious and remember. Since I only have 5, which I feel a little guilty about because if you follow me, you know I have this TBR thing that like I'm supposed to be reading like 2 romance novels, a big fat book, a wild card book, 2 book of the months, and an ebook. I didn't do that this month. I did like okay. I did some of the things, very few of the things. And we're just going to talk about what I did manage to complete. The first book I read in February was Untethering Dark by Desiree M. Niccolai. I really like her a lot. She wrote the Call to the Deep series. She wrote Given to the Ghoul. And this was Harlequin's first monster romance ever. So proud of her for breaking that barrier with Harlequin. I had the arc for this. It did come out a while ago, just so you know. It was a wonderful winter vibes read. The premise of Untethering Dark is that we have Astrid, who is a mountain hag, and she is basically going through this training to become a powerful witch who lives in the Black Forest in Germany. She lives in the woods, and she lives in this extremely cozy, wonderful cabin, but there is a prehistoric monster that also lives in these woods. And so in order to appease this monster, she leaves out an offering every night so that it doesn't kill her. And it does kill a lot of people in the woods. So there are signs everywhere because the park rangers are also aware of this monster, that if you're gonna hang out here, cool, you need to leave before dark. And so the monster pretty indiscriminately kills people in the woods who are there after dark, who don't give him an offering. Some of them are bad people, but not all of them. So do know that going in, that this is not like a only slays evil monster. Also slays evil, but also wrong place, wrong time people get killed. So basically one night, a group of tourists are like messing around by Astrid's house and mess up her offering. And they also let her goats out. And she freaks out because she's like, oh my gosh, the prehistoric creature is gonna eat my goats and I don't have an offering, maybe he's gonna eat me. So she decides to bring cookies, which is all she has, out with her while she's looking for the goats. And she does come upon him and they have this sort of like electric connection. This is a true monster romance. This is not like he looks like a man. His head is like a giant skull of like a mix between a moose and a dinosaur with no skin on it. He has really, really long arms. He goes from walking on 4, like crawling on 4 legs, but arms, or being on 2 feet, and he's quite monstrous. Astrid is also quite monstrous, which I liked. She doesn't have any qualms about killing poachers or people that are destroying the forest. She very much is a protector of the forest, and they seem well matched. And so there's this group of humans who are doing stuff in the forest they shouldn't be doing. And that is the majority of the plot forward for them outside of the romance. This was a very enjoyable read. If you like monster romance, I would 100% recommend it. It had some really cozy winter vibes, which I know is odd for me to be telling you about now in March. But if you are still in the wintry vibes mood, or you want to read something that's like cozy but very spicy, so you know it is very spicy and very murdery as well, but also somehow cozy, this would be a perfect read for you. So that book I could have counted either in my romance novel or my ebook. I have a couple other things that could work for both, so let's just throw that in my romance novels. And then we'll say my next romance novel I read was Surrender to the Highlander by Lindsay Sands. This is in the Highland Bride series. I think it's number 5. I am not reading them in order. Like, I kind of am, but not 100%. So I can't really remember where exactly we are in the series. But we're with the Buchanan brothers, who have been the heroes for a lot of these. And we're with Niels this time. And he and his brothers go to this woman, Edith's, keep, because she's their younger sister's very good friend. And her sister hasn't heard from her in a while. So they head over there to make sure everything's okay. When they get there, Edith is very sick. And her family has, all died. Everyone's died out from this terrible illness, and they can't figure out what it is. So one of Niels's brothers is a healer, Rory. He's very convenient to have around in these medieval times. And so he starts to realize he thinks maybe Edith was poisoned. And so now Niels is spending a lot of time with her and realizing he really likes her a lot, and maybe they should, follow that attraction, while also being very worried because there's probably a poisoner still around who could still kill her. These are, I was going to say a really bad word that began with bat and ended with what you know, and then crazy. They just are crazy, but they're so entertaining. I was talking to him this morning in one of my writers chat groups I have on WhatsApp about a particular scene in this. These are crazy, but they're so much fun. This woman, it gets poisoned in medieval times and survives. And you know what? And these people get stabbed and they get head injuries, and they just survive. And there's always a little bit of a mystery, and they're always just so much fun. And I'm going to read another one in April probably, because I just really enjoy this series. It's very, very fun. So I don't usually do stars on here. I forgot to give you Untethering Dark. I'd give 5 stars to. I'd probably give this 4, a blast. Let's completely switch gears now. So now we're going to go to one of the book of the months I read. I'm supposed to read 2 a month. I didn't read 2 this month. I did read about 100 pages of my second one, but I didn't finish it till March, so that will be on my March wrap up. So the one I did read this month was A Sea of Unspoken Things by Adrienne Young. This is a completely different tone than the last 2 books I was talking about. So it's magical realism, contemporary set. We are following James, who is, I think she's in her early 30s and lives in San Francisco. And she has been notified that her twin brother, Johnny, has died in their hometown, which is in a very Pacific Northwest woodsy area. I think we're in Oregon though, not California. That's very cut off from the world. And she was kind of one of the lucky ones to get out. James and Johnny have this weird connection, this weird twin connection, where they feel sometimes she can see through his eyes and she can feel his emotions. And when she gets back to town, she can still feel his emotions. And he has died in an accident that appears to be a hunting accident. He was a naturalist photographer, and he was tracking some owls for this group that I think is supposed to be National Geographic, but it's not that, or Audubon Society, whatever. And he's shot and killed. And but it's hunting season, so people are he didn't have orange on. It might have just been a stray bullet. The person who killed him might not even know they killed him. So, but James doesn't feel like that's right. Ultimately, she reconnects with Micah. The 3 of them were basically best friends, but you can tell right from the beginning that Micah and James have a past beyond that. And she and Micah try to figure out what happened to Johnny. And it was really beautiful. It was quite sad. So I told everybody I think in my TBR that I was worried about reading this book because I am a parent to twins. it was okay. Like, that wasn't sad. It was just sad reading about someone who lost their sibling who they loved dearly. So that was very sad, and like saying goodbye to someone you loved so much. But I really enjoyed this book. I really like Adrienne Young's storytelling, the way she writes a book, the way she sets out a setting and like very quietly gets you involved. So when you read her books, I think the first 100 pages are pretty slow usually because she's just laying so much groundwork, but the payoff is fantastic. And she ends books very well. I have felt that about, this is the third book of hers I've read. I felt like she always ends a book very well. Next, I have another romance ebook. So I'm going to count this one as my ebook since I counted Untethering Dark as one of my romances. And it's Barbarian's Heart by Ruby Dixon. And guess what? This was my favorite Ice Planet Barbarians book I've ever read. And it had tropes that I'm not usually a huge fan of, but I really enjoyed this one. Where we left off in the last book, I'm going to be super honest, I can never remember the titles of all of them because they're just like Barbarians something every single time. But I did read the book before this, and the book before, there was an earthquake and the cave system they lived in collapsed, and you knew that some people got injured. So this book follows Stacy and Pashov. Pashov is a Sakui and Stacy's a human. If you're unfamiliar with the Ice Planet Barbarian series, it's about a bunch of women who are kidnapped by bad aliens. They crash on this planet full of good aliens, and then they have to stay there because they got to put like this parasite in their body, and the parasite tells you who you should be with because you're going to make strong babies with them. Okay, so Pashov and Stacy are already together and already have a child. There were a couple couples in the beginning of the book that Ruby Dixon, in the beginning of the series, Ruby Dixon just kind of was like, yeah, they're together, and you didn't get their story. So now they're married, they have a kid, but when the cave-in happens, Pashov is in there and he gets a horrible head injury and he gets like recent memory loss. So like he remembers his parents and he remembers his siblings, but he does not remember ever meeting Stacy and he doesn't remember their kid. So it's an amnesia love story / marriage in trouble. And it was so good because it like really, like I usually think of these books kind of like eating Skittles. They're super fun. You eat them really fast, but they're like, you know, they are what they are. This one really tugged on my heartstrings because Ruby Dixon did such a good job at like characterizing how much grief Stacy was dealing with. Because even though he survived and like they're like hanging out sort of, even though he's like mainly staying with his old friends because he feels really awkward staying with her, she's just grieving the loss of their relationship. And I loved that. Like just stupid stuff. Like if you're married or you've been with someone long term, like the stupid, silly, like inside jokes that happen all day long and that those are just gone. And it was really, really well written and very fun. I really liked this one a lot. So, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily start with this one, but if you're going to try out Ice Planet Barbarians, no, there's a great amnesia marriage in trouble, which I like never ever read that trope, those tropes. So you may be thinking, wow, I have no idea why Colleen read so few books in February. She was like snippy snappy flying through these. And that is true. While I was doing a lot of work also, so I wasn't reading every day like I usually do, I did read those first books quite quickly. But here's where I kind of hit a wall, which kind of made the second half of the month more difficult. Wild card. I forgot that I'm in a book club and we don't have our act together at all. So like we haven't met for book club since October and it's March now, but we've had books that we've read. We just haven't met. So I've been kind of like not always reading the books that are recommended. I recommended Blackbird House for November, which by Alice Hoffman, which I read, but we never were able to meet because we all have kids. It's difficult. And so I skipped the night. We didn't do a book for December. I skipped January. And then this was supposed to be our February book, but we haven't met. So I don't know if we're going to talk about it. So moving forward, I don't know if I'm actually going to read my book club books until it's nice enough that we can be outside, because that's when a book club worked. It worked when we could hang out in someone's backyard. It doesn't work so much when we have to be inside someone's house with like all their children. And I don't know, we probably wouldn't be able to get it together to like meet at a library or something, though that would be fun. Kind of hilarious. The woman who wanted to choose the books this month, she was like, here are the 3 books that I'm going to pick. This is what we usually do. And then we vote. And she said, what do you guys want to vote on? And her picks were Listen for the Lie by Amy Tintera, which was one of the best books I read last year. And I was immediately like, I will reread that book. I loved that book. That book was so good. To which someone was like, well, let's read something Colleen hasn't read. And I was like, I love that book though. I really don't mind rereading. So then the next recommendation was Dinner for Vampires by Bethany Joy Lenz. And I was like, that book was fine. I thought that book was very middle of the road. And honestly, I would not have reread it. Even if we were going to meet, I would have probably just like read a summary again and like tried to jog my memory. And then the third book I hadn't read. So then everyone's like, well, let's do the third book because Colleen hasn't read it. And I was like, sure, we'll do it. Even though it's totally not what I like to read. And it was The Paradise Problem by Christina Lauren. Obviously, I read a lot of romance. I'm just like not a rom-com reader. I'm not. And it's just like not my vibe at all. I like historical romance. I like paranormal or fantasy romance. And I like, obviously, Ice Planet Barbarians. And I like contemporary romance that's not a rom-com. I'm just not a rom-com reader. I read it though. I did. And it wasn't a hard read. It wasn't a slog. I just remember I read the first chapter, I don't know what day, but then I like didn't pick it up for 5 days because I was just like uninterested, but I knew I had to read this next, so I didn't want to start anything else. And then I did like kind of force myself to sit down and read it. Let me tell you about it. It's a fake marriage, like it's a real marriage, but like a fake relationship trope, which I don't love in modern stories. I think it's a very fun trope in like medieval romance, historical romance, to some extent, fantasy romance, if you're in like more of like a not contemporary setting. But I have a hard time like making that work for me in my brain. Anna Green is our heroine. And she's a disaster. Like she's a manic pixie dream girl to the highest extent. She's the heart. Okay, I had a lot of problems with her character because she graduated from UCLA, okay? That is not an easy school to get into. She began UCLA as a pre-med major. I imagine that program is quite difficult to get into. So you think, this woman is quite smart, okay? So that's how I would picture her, quite smart. She changes her major to art. Still, probably really smart, just an artist also. We catch up with her 3 years after she graduated when she had been fake married, but legally married to this guy named West so that they could get family housing, during which she thought he was hot, but like never actually cared at all to learn anything about him, even though his brother is one of her good friends. And like literally 3 years later, he's like, hey, I'm actually the heir to like basically Kroger. And I need you to pretend to be married to me because my family thinks we're married. And we need to go to, where are we? Thailand? We're somewhere in Southeast Asia. Now I can't remember. It doesn't say in the blurb and I honestly can't remember. I think we're in Thailand. We might be like in Bali. And pretend to be my wife because my sister's having this basically Crazy Rich Asians type wedding and you need to be perfect for my family. And then there's like a bunch of other stuff that happens. Here's where I had a lot of issues. One, when we meet Anna 3 years after graduation, she's like a legit disaster. Like she got fired for shoplifting and like is high out of her mind and like gross, and her apartment's gross. And she talks about how her dad is sick. And so that's a lot of stress on her. But I just didn't buy someone who had gotten into a pre-med program at UCLA at age 18 being that much of a like loafer. I don't know. It was hard to contend with. Secondly, she didn't know her legal husband's last name, which is Weston. His name was Liam Weston, and she just thought his name was West. Always. She never knew his last name. Again, I found that very unrealistic. So there were a lot of plot holes in here, like a ton. And then once they get to the island and they're faking being married, I had even a harder time. I felt like the story really rested on them both being hot people. And I don't know how much either of them really, like it felt very surface level, if that makes sense. But I will say, I'm not a rom-com reader. It's very zany. It's very like, oh no, what's gonna happen next? And that's just like not my cup of romance tea. A few women in the book club really loved it. We haven't talked about it yet, but just via text, they really enjoyed it. So I do think there's a large audience for this. Obviously, I mean, they sold hundreds of thousands of copies of this book. So it's kind of weird with book club reviewing a book because I feel bad saying like all the things that didn't work for me because I was pretty sure they wouldn't work for me going into it. I would never have picked this up on my own because I know it's a rom-com and I'm just not a big rom-com reader. I also really, really, really have a problem with the billionaire hero because like, that does nothing for me. It just doesn't. I don't know. Like, I find way more romantic, like, we have nothing, but we have each other. That's so much more romantic to me than I'm going to give you a diamond ring that's so heavy you can't pick your hands up. I wear a very plain wedding band. That's enough about Paradise Problem. If I had to rate it, I'd probably rate it a high 2, like a 2.75. I don't feel like it got enough out of me to give it a 3. I really don't like rating stuff under 3 because that's who I am. And I really wish we were in a 10-point rating system. It would make my life so much easier. If we were in a 10-point rating system, I probably would have given it like a 65% because that's like, like a D something, and which I didn't really like, but there are people out there who I'm sure enjoyed it. And that's my wrap up for you on this rainy March day of all the books I read in February. Let's talk about the books I read in March now. Hopefully that transition was seamless. So as you know, I have my format that I have to work with. 2 romance novels, at least 2 book of the months, part of a big long book, a wild card, 1 ebook. I completed it this month. So proud of myself. I actually did read 2 romance novels. I read part of a really long book. I read 2 book of the months. I would have liked to have read 3, but I only read 2. And I read a wild card, and I read multiple ebooks. I think I read 2 or 3. We're going to see because I wrote everything down. We're going to talk about these books in order though, instead of doing them like, here are the 2 romance novels, here's the big long book, all that. Because I just feel like that will work better in my brain. Also, these are going to be like slightly more spoilery than normal, okay? Just like slightly. I'm not going to do full on spoilers, but some of the books I am going to just do a little bit more of a spoilery description than I do. I still think it's going to be fine. I don't think you're going to feel spoiled, but if there's a book you're like really looking forward to, maybe skip it. The first book I read was Black Woods, Blue Sky by Eowyn Ivey. This is the story of Birdie, who lives in Alaska, and she's a little bit of a disaster. She's a single mom to Emmeline, who I think is like 6-ish. And there's this man named Arthur who lives in the wilderness, and he comes into their town sometimes to like hang out. And he's very odd, but Birdie finds him extremely intriguing. And then he invites her and her daughter to come live with him, bare bones in the Alaskan wilderness, and they go. This was a very uncomfortable book for me to read. I felt almost sick at points. And I don't know if it would be uncomfortable for everyone, but the main crux of the story is that Arthur is a bear shifter, but not in the way you usually read bear shifters, not in the way you usually read shifters. This book is not a romance. And he is basically a human who is also a bear, but he does not retain any sort of humanity when he is in his bear form. And Birdie learns this, and she doesn't save her daughter from the part that was so hard for me is that she puts her daughter at such risk. And maybe it's also because of me personally. I have this very specific anxiety about taking my children anywhere where they are more than 1 hour away from a hospital. And that is, I know there's a ton of people who live their life like that, and I just can't. I get very anxious when we are in national parks and we're far away. And it might be because the first time I ever took a kid to a national park, he got really sick and he was 1.5 and it was scary and we were far away from a hospital and he was fine, but it was scary. And so I do think that that's partially where my anxiety stems from, that I do have this overwhelming feeling that something is gonna go wrong. I mean, we took our kids to a state park a few years ago and we were 45 minutes away from a hospital and my daughter got scarlet fever. So I just have a hard time with these, like, choosing to put your child at risk. And more than just at risk of being away from civilization where people can help you, but with a dangerous person who you don't really know. And so that made the book kind of an uncomfortable, hard read, but it's beautifully written. The writing style in this is gorgeous. You feel so immersed in Alaska. I know Eowyn Ivy lives in Alaska, and I read her book, The Snow Child, which also takes place in Alaska, which had some hard stuff, but not as uncomfortable as this. Definitely not as uncomfortable as this. Or maybe it is. I read that book before I had children, so I have no idea if maybe I would feel the exact same way. There is a bit of a fairy tale feel to it. If you like fairy tales that are a little darker, it's very tragic. It's a very tragic story through and through. It's a hard book to recommend. I feel like if you like dark fairy tales, you're looking for something that doesn't end happily with beautiful writing, then you probably would really enjoy it. I gave it 4 stars. Great writing, hard subject matter for me. Let's completely switch gears. The second book I read in March was one of my most anticipated reads of the year, and it was A Rebel Without Claws by Juliet Cross. It's the first book in the Southern Charm series. This is a spin-off series of the Stay a Spell series, which I absolutely adore, and it's the next generation. And what I loved is she didn't care that it's the next generation. That we finished this story in 2022, I think, and the kids are grown up and nothing's changed about the world around. She's not writing a futuristic book, and I loved it. It's just we're living in this muddy timeline, and I adored that because I was a little concerned. I'm like, is it going to be 2045 in this? It's not. They're just older, and I adored it. Our main characters are Ronan Reed, who is a werewolf, and he is a UFC fighter for werewolves, and not usually into it. Very into it in this book. And Celine is one of the triplets that Mateo and Evie have. They are the couple from Wolf Called Wild, which is the first book in the Stay a Spell series. And Mateo, her dad, is a very overbearing, protective werewolf, and she has 2 brothers, so they're triplets. She's the only girl. One is a werewolf, and one is a warlock more, I feel like, is the vibe you get from him. Ronan is very broken, and he cannot shift. He hasn't seen his wolf in years, and you go through this journey with him, figuring out what caused his wolf to go into hiding. And it's very sad, but very beautiful. I didn't cry, but it's very tender-hearted. Celine is an aura witch, like her aunt Isadora, I think is the aura witch, which is what she really just wants to help people, and she wants to make them feel better. And so she gets to Ronan right away, and he knows right away that she's his soulmate because he's a werewolf, so he can smell it. But there are so many fun scenes in this with them, with her family. She's kind of old, but lives at home still. I feel like she's 25, but still lives at home. And so her dad, Mateo, who's crazy when he's a werewolf, he's alpha, catches them sometimes. It was very fun. I really enjoyed it. And there were just some really, really good scenes. And I'm already when does the next one come out? Even though this one came out literally last month. So probably not for a year, but I can't wait to see who's next. There's a few cousins in the mix, plus her siblings. So I don't know who the next story is going to be, but I absolutely adored this book, and I gave it 5 stars. The next book I read was an ebook. I'll put the cover up here. It's Riding with the Kodiak by Cameron Clare. It's the second in the Devil's Pack MC, Motorcycle Club, series, but I got it as a freebie, and I didn't need to read the first book. I had no issues following the plot line, so you could totally just read it. I'm going to read you the blurb. It doesn't sound like something I would normally read, but when I do the freebie days, I've always put Finding His Mate in those, I get a lot of shifter books because that's kind of what I use those for. So this was a bear shifter, and I think when I got this also, I was toying with the idea of writing a bear shifter series, which I have now not going to do. But this was one I picked up, and then I just picked it one night to read when I was having my insomnia. Wasn't a great insomnia book, though, because it is a little heavy. Here's your blurb. As the eldest shifter in my family, I should be taking care of my siblings in Eternal Lake, but instead made my home with my MC shifter family 100 miles away in Broken Arrow, Montana. I don't know why, but I felt called here 2 years ago, and I'm waiting for the reason. Military veteran, sergeant-at-arms, gun shop owner. 3 things I'm not usually into. I have a full life as a bear shifter, as full of a life as a bear shifter gets without his mate. At my age, I'm thinking I'll never find her until one day I see her walking across a parking lot, and later sent her hiding in my cabin. My mate is human, forbidden, in trouble, and has run willingly into my arms. Well, I can't deny biology. The fates sent me a human mate, and no matter how forbidden she is, my bear's protective instincts will do whatever it takes to make her mine. She's running from people who consider her their property, and they mean to get her back. They can try, but they have no idea what me and my MC brethren will do to protect my fated mate. No idea. As you can see, shifter romances are weird because some are heavy, like Finding His Mate is heavy, and some are easy breezy, like some other series that I like. And so you never know really what you're going to get unless you actually read the blurb before you start the book, which I tend not to do. I read the blurb before I download it, but I don't always read the blurb before I start reading it. It was heavy because the female main character, whose name I'm of course forgetting, give me 2 seconds so I can look it up. Her name was Dinah. She's literally like kidnapped by a cult, and they are gonna hunt her alive. And so I was like, holy, you know what? This is heavy. Like the beginning of the book, I'm like, oh my God. And honestly, I think I started reading this at like 2 a.m. when I woke up one night and couldn't fall back asleep, as many of my ebooks I read. And I was like, oh my God, this is a bit much. But I did end up liking it. I liked how it went. There were some weird things in it. Don't get me wrong. There were some very much like virgin girl meets her shifter maid and she's suddenly like a sex pot, which these books have that, and that's fine. And I kind of know that it's par for the course. There was some weird public sex stuff in it though, considering she had never slept with anyone before. But I still thought it was fun. It was entertaining, but it does have a dark beginning. So go in knowing that. I gave it 3.5 stars. It was good. We're going to jump again to something wildly different. I always think it must be so weird for someone to stumble upon this channel, like for the first time and get one of my wrap-ups because they're just all over the place. So we've done so far a magical realism. We've done a paranormal romance. We've done another paranormal romance that's a little bit more crazy. And now we're going to do a classic. For my wild card, I read 84 Charing Cross Road by Helen Hanff. This was a delight. I enjoyed this so thoroughly. Here's how I came to even have it, because obviously it wasn't on my TBR and it wasn't even on my shelf at the beginning of the month. Second week of March, I went to take my kids to their school book fair, which was after conferences. But we were sick, and like I went to conferences, I came home, I was sick, and so I like wanted to take a hot shower. I took a shower. My one daughter was sick. We bundled back up and went back to go to the book fair because book fairs are during conferences. And when we got back, it had closed 15 minutes ago and the registers were closed. So we couldn't buy anything. All 3 of my daughters, my son goes to a different school because he's in middle school, burst into tears that we missed the book fair. And obviously, like, I would have let them buy 2 books each because I like to support the school. So what do? If we can't support our school, we're going to support our independent bookstore. So instead, I was like, get in the car. We're going to the bookstore. We're not going to cry. We're going to get books. We're going to do everything. And I took them to our independent bookshop in our town, and I let them each pick out 2 books. And I was like, I'm going to get myself a book because I probably wouldn't have bought myself a book at the kids' book fair. They usually only have cookbooks, and I am very specific about the cookbooks I want because I have like a ton of dietary restrictions. So I saw this on a table, and it was so charming. I didn't know anything about this. It's nonfiction. It's collected letters between a woman who lives in New York and kind of like an antique bookshop in London, and how the people get books for her. And she writes back and forth over decades. And it's so lovely. A big part of the book is post-World War II. They still have very strict rations in England. And she sends them food and stuff like that for Christmas, for them to have like she sends them these care packages for the employees there. So, and they all write her these thank you notes. It was beautiful. And most of all, it reminded me of, I worked at an indie bookstore for a while, and there was a man, and I was not his point person. Someone else was his point person. I worked in the children's department, but I would sometimes answer the phone. It was not letters, answer the phone. And he lived in New York, and he would call once or twice a week, and he had a super thick New York accent. I still remember his name, which I'm not going to say just for privacy's sake, but he would be like, hello, say my name. I'd like 4 or 5 hardcover books. Like, he had that thick New York accent, and he always wanted current events, biography, history, brand new releases every week. He wanted between 4 and 10 a week. And it was just like a rush trying to find books he hadn't read yet. And he always paid for overnight shipping from FedEx. And we always joked that something must have happened And he like broke ties with like some of the indie bookstores in New York, the fact that he was calling one in Illinois. But we just had such a lovely relationship with him. And honestly, people like that really do keep these small bookstores in business some months. You know, in January, when you're making like no money at an indie bookstore, and he would call every week and order his books. And that would be like our biggest sales, a lot, to get those books to him in New York. And I knew he had passed away a while ago. And so I did, after I finished reading this book, looked up his obituary and read it. And the woman who was his point person, who I was very good friends with, but have lost touch with, sadly, because I really love her, had written a beautiful comment about how much she cherished their friendship. And it just really made me, like, this book just really tugged at my heartstrings because of this. 4.5 stars. This was lovely. I read it in an afternoon outside on a beautiful day. I truly recommend it. Let's switch gears again completely. Next, I read Mountain Man Makes a Baby by Olivia Mallow, who is one of my good writing friends. This was one of those insta-lovey. It's like 80 pages. A mountain man in Montana wants to hire a woman as a surrogate, basically. And she's going to come live with him, though. He's got a lot of money. He lives in a mansion, like a log cabin mansion. And an English woman, is coming to fill out the requirements. And it was really sweeter than I thought it was going to be. I thought it was just be a quick, spicy read. Olivia Mallow does great, quick, spicy reads. But an added layer to it is that they are both widowed. And I really liked that part because they've both sort of sworn off love, but both want a kid. And so they're like, yeah, whatever, I can have. They're not doing in vitro. That's part of it. And so she's like, whatever, I can sleep with this guy a couple times, get pregnant, have a baby with him. And then I'll have, like, she's going to be in the life as the mother. I'll have a baby. I don't really care about the relationship. And so it was really sweet. Olivia managed to pack a lot of sweetness into this short, spicy read. My second book of the month pick of the month was The Only Survivors by Megan Miranda. I picked this because I loved Daughter of Mine. And this was on her backlist that was available for Book of the Month. I'm going to read you the blurb because I don't think I'll do a good job describing it without being too spoilery. So let's go with what the professional did. A decade ago, 2 vans filled with high school seniors on a school service trip crashed into a Tennessee ravine, a tragedy that claimed the lives of multiple classmates and teachers. The 9 students who managed to escape the river that night were irrevocably changed. A year later, after one of the survivors dies by suicide on the anniversary of the crash, the rest of them make a pact to come together each year to commemorate that terrible night, to keep one another safe, to hold one another accountable, or both. Their annual meeting place, a house on the Outer Banks, has long been a refuge. But by the 10th anniversary, Cassidy has worked to distance herself from the tragedy and from the other survivors. She's changed her phone number. She's blocked the others' email addresses. This year, she's determined to finally break ties once and for all. But on the day of the reunion, she receives a text with an obituary attached. Another survivor is gone. Now there are 7, and Cassidy finds herself hurtling back toward the group, wild with grief and suspicion. Almost immediately, something feels off, and then I'm just going to stop there. So there ends up being a storm, and there ends up being a little bit of like a locked house. Who's the bad guy? This book is told in present chapters and flashback chapters. You get 1 chapter in flashback per survivor as to what the accident was like and what happened. I didn't love this book. And here's why. I didn't hate it either. I didn't love the flashbacks because they felt very inconsistent to me because they each had a different narrator. So it wasn't like you were getting what you felt like was an unbiased look at what actually happened. You were getting a point of view, which could be cool. This book got very slow in the middle. And that was kind of hard for me as a thriller. I was expecting it to kind of be like picking up speed, but the middle was very slow. Sometimes I think thrillers have really slow beginnings because you have to get framework laid, but then they just have a good trajectory. The beginning was good, and then it really dipped, and then the end was fast-paced again. I didn't love the twist. One of the twists, there's 2 twists, and one of the twists I was pretty convinced was the twist. I wasn't like exactly sure on the details, but I was like, well, that has to happen. The final twist, I didn't love very much. And that's fine. I just didn't like it very much. I think Daughter of Mine was much better than Only Survivors. Someone said that in one of my comments on my TBR, I think, that Daughter of Mine was better than The Only Survivors, or that The Only Survivors wasn't great. But it didn't, I didn't hate it. I didn't think it was like so bad that I won't read another Megan Miranda. I definitely will, because I love Daughter of Mine. And I do think writers get better with each book they write. So this was maybe her debut. Let's see. Nope. She'd written a lot of books before this. Oh my God, she's written a ton of books. I'll definitely read another one because I like Daughter of Mine so much. And then lastly, here's a cool thing. I read all those books in the first 2 weeks of March. Yeah. And then I've got one I read part of that I'm going to talk about, and the last one I completed. So I literally, really, the first 2 weeks of March were super heavy stacked. In the last 2 weeks of March, I had a lot of work to do, so I was very focused on that. But I slowly read Lady Daring Takes a Lover by Julianne Long. This was an interesting romance novel. The premise is that Delilah, who's a lady, her husband dies, and she doesn't care that much. She didn't really like him that much. He was fine. And he had a ton of debt, an insane amount of debt, to the point that she's basically gonna be tossed on the streets. But there was one thing he owned outright in his will, and it was this random boarding house in like a really bad neighborhood in London. And so she gets that. So then at the reading of the will, she meets his mistress, who she did not know he had, who is also pissed that he didn't leave her anything. And they become friends and decide to turn this house into a boarding house. This was where the book, what was kind of slow for me, is the first 75 pages are these two setting up a boarding house together, which in a traditional romance, I'd be like, are they gonna fall in love? But I knew it wasn't like a sapphic romance. So then we meet the hero, who's a captain in the army. His last name's Hardy, his first name's Tristan. So we either call him Captain Hardy or Tristan. And he is chasing down a smuggler ring that the late Lord Daring was a part of. And he ends up getting a room in the boarding house to kind of figure out if Lady Daring has anything to do with it. First half of the book was pretty slow because you didn't really like him. He wasn't great. And she was more building her relationship with her husband's ex-mistress. But the second half of the book was great. So I did read the second half of the book quite fast. It just took me a while to get to it. It was a lovely little Regency romance with fun characters in the boarding house. And it ended on a cliffhanger with the mistress maybe falling in love with someone. I do think I'll eventually pick that book up, not immediately, but it ended up being fun and spicy, and I had a lot of cute lines that I really enjoyed. I gave that 4 stars. Okay, so lastly, I wanted to read a big fat book in March. And now here's a little bit of a spoiler. I am filming this on March 30th, so I do still have some reading to do. I was supposed to read The Secret History. I decided to put that down because if I had to wait to finish that book to read all my big fat books, I wasn't going to read any big fat books this year. That's just how it was. I wasn't interested in it. So instead, The Night of the Witch by Sarah Rush and Beth Revis. I just started yesterday. I'm on page 30, and I'm probably going to read about 30 more pages today. This is about Fritzy, who's a witch, and Otto, who's a witch hunter. And Otto and company have just destroyed her town, killed a lot of people, and kidnapped her cousin and a bunch of other witches to execute them in Trier. And she is hell-bent on beating them to Trier. And Otto seems like a bad guy, but hopefully he's just in hiding, a man on the inside. I am hopeful because right now I don't love him. On the back, it says that it's a cover. He says that the Hexenjagers, who are the witch hunters, burned his innocent mother alive, and he's been plotting his revenge against the people who tore his family apart ever since. Now the time has come for them to pay. Can't wait for that. It's a little bit of a stressful read, so I'm not going to read it before bed. That's my only caveat with this book, but I'm liking it so far. Hopefully I'll have a nice big chunk, but probably not the whole thing, read for you by the end of April that I can tell you about. And that is my March wrap up and my February wrap up. So I read a ton of books, a ton to say. Did you read any of these books? Probably, maybe. I mean, at some point, not a ton were new. Can't even remember what I read in February now. I know I read The Paradise Problem because I didn't like it. Other than that, no idea. I hope you enjoyed this super long wrap up and that you did stick around to the end or jump around if you wanted to. If you're still here, tell me what you read in February and March. Tell me what was fantastic. Tell me what you hated. If you don't want to write words, how should we do it? Let's do a heart emoji for February and a flower emoji for March. And as always, I hope you're in the middle of a good book, about to start reading a good book, or about to start writing a great book. I'll see you soon.